Today on the Roundhouse, we're talking about how the East Broad Top Railroad is coming back to life. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode number 90 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking to everybody in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it today. I couldn't be more excited. We are talking to Brad Esposito, General Manager for the recently formed East Broad Top Foundation, which has purchased the railroad from longtime owners, the Kowalczyk family, and have announced that they are putting forth plans to get the railroad back up and running. I am very excited about this. I've been a member of the Friends of the East Broad Top, which is the nonprofit that has been in existence for over 2 decades to support the preservation of the railroad, and a board member for 2 years. I couldn't be happier. And I'm sure you guys are very excited as well. So we'll hear from Brad in just a minute. Before then, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. We have 89 other great interviews that you can check out at theroundhousepodcast.com. Our guest today is one of the architects for the new era of the East Broad Top Railroad. He is the general manager of the East Broad Top Foundation. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Brad Esposito.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to have you on the show, Brad. Let's start base level. How would you describe the East Broad Top Railroad?
The East Broad Top Railroad, for those that don't know, is one of the oldest surviving narrow gauge 36-inch gauge railroads east of the Mississippi in the United States, really, for that matter. The construction was begun in around 1872 and operated until 1956 as a coal hauler in south central PA, Huntington County, and was purchased by the Kowalczyk family in 1956, who was a salvage company from Indiana, PA. In 1960, the railroad was reopened as a tourist railroad for the bicentennial of the Orbisonia Rock Hill Furnace boroughs, of which the railroad was headquartered, and operated until 2011 as a tourist railroad, and has been quietly waiting since then until 2020. Which would be the 60th anniversary of their tourist operations.
Of its history, what are some of your favorite little pieces of trivia?
You know, it was really interesting because nothing really separates it from any other random railroad in western Pennsylvania, coal hauling road in western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, New York. I'm a big fan of the coal hauling short lines in western PA. And nothing really differentiates it from any of those other railroads other than it was narrow gauge. And because it was narrow gauge and because it lasted so long into the 1950s, I think a lot of rail fans at the time, took note of it. And obviously the Kowalczyk family found something special with it that they decided to keep it, because while it being narrow gauge and, it's still here, whereas 90% of the other little short line railroads in Western PA are gone. So I just think the fact that it was unique in the narrow gauge was what really set it apart, and probably the reason why it's still here.
When did the East Broad Top first strike a chord for you?
For me, as a kid, my dad and my grandfather actually and their family had visited in the 60s, very early 60s, around 1961 or 62, I believe. And then as a kid, really, I know the other day I kind of put this all together in my head, and it was a 1975 issue of Railfan magazine that had an article by John Krause and Jim Boyd the former editor of the magazine, which was called Orbisonia Obsession. And to this day, I still have a copy of that. And I can remember as a kid just pouring through that article over and over again. And this was long before I'd ever come across any of the books, and obviously well before the internet. But, then making trips there with my family, my mom and dad as a kid, and then later on with my wife and our kids, and getting involved with the Friends of the East Broad Top, it's just kind of over the years has become somewhat of a favorite of mine. And I keep looking back at that article, Orbisonia Obsession, and it's kind of rung true even for myself now as well.
How did you first become involved with the Friends of the East Broad Top?
Really, it was probably around 2004. My dad and I, Jim Esposito, were looking for something kind of to do for a weekend just so he and I could spend some time together. And the Friends at the time had really just started getting involved with the restoration projects at Rock Hill Furnace. And so we went down for a weekend, just absolutely had a blast with the rest of the volunteers there. And it became about a decade-long, once-a-month trek down there to do various projects. During that time, I was involved with the group, the Boiler House Rats, who were involved in the heavy reconstruction of the boiler house and the foundry and the blacksmith shop and numerous other projects, which made a lot of really good friends there, a lot of good contacts, lifelong friends, and had a lot of fun doing it. It was dirty, hard work, but worth every minute and every weekend that we spent down there.
It's so unique that you get to work on these artifacts, these buildings, in the setting that they've always been. For me personally, I felt that always makes it a unique entity.
Yeah, I want to say my home railroad, the one I grew up around, of which I co-authored a book on with Kurt Reisweber on the Pittsburgh and Shawmut, was the one that, I grew up around it. They ran through near my grandparents' farm, and I did a lot of riding with the Pittsburgh and Shawmut with their crews back in the late 80s and early 90s when they were still running cabooses and 55-ton hoppers. And, the place always had a real small kind of family feel, but now it's all gone. Even the shops in Brookville are closed now and kind of derelict. But, one thing that I always thought about the East Broad Top, compared to any other museums and tourist railroads, was that, like you said, everything belonged there. Everything has been there for 100 years, and the more time I spend down there, especially with this new project, that it's like you never run out of things to find that have just been there. Every corner, every cupboard, every shelf has something that was either created there or has spent 100 years there, and it's just a really interesting and a cool place to be. Not like anywhere else. Of any other railroad museum or anything like that in the United States.
If you're listening to this and wondering what the shop complex looks like today and to see how much of it's survived, check out febt.org. There's a link on the site called Explore the Railroad, and it has a Google Map tool that allows you to see these pins showing the different buildings. Having spent that much time in developing the affinity for the railroad and this original fabric, what led to the idea of forming what ultimately became the East Broad Top Foundation?
It really was kind of a coincidence. Stephen Lane, who had been a volunteer with RTY, the Trolley Museum there in Rock Hill, and around the EBT in its last couple of years of operation, he and I had just a chance conversation almost a year ago in January of 2019. And I have a 20-year career with Genesee and Wyoming with their Buffalo and Pittsburgh Railroad. And I started out initially with the Pittsburgh and Shawmut and then evolved into the BP and then later on. But 8 of those years was in management. And so I got to do a lot of traveling with Genesee and Wyoming to their European operations and all around the United States. Gained a lot of really good experience with that. And upon this chance conversation with Stephen Lane, we kind of discussed the current status of the railroad and this, any ideas that he had, and people that he might have known. And so we put together, a small basic business plan and met with David Brightbill, longtime employee of the East Broad Top, and also Lawrence B. Miller, who has volunteered with the Friends for nearly 20 years and also has done shop tours for the railroad. Since then, and since the railroad was closed in 2011, so we met, discussed the plans, decided that we wanted to move forward, and made some contacts with various potential donors and people, business leaders, and government officials and things through the summer of 2019, which ultimately ended up with our getting in contact with Henry Posner out of Pittsburgh. And Henry's well known in his rail preservation circles, as well as the chairman of the Railroad Development Corporation in the Iowa Interstate Railroad. And through Henry, we met with Mr. Kowalczyk several times and, just started moving the plan forward.
When did it hit you that, yes, this is really happening? Yes, you are part of this movement that's going to see the beginning of a new era on the railroad?
Really, I think what it really kind of struck me was after meeting with Henry and Mr. Kowalczyk several times throughout July and August of last year in 2019, himself and Wick Mormon, Bennett Levin, and Rod Case, of which they came down to Rock Hill and toured the station and the shop facilities. And I think at the point at which it really hit me is after a meeting with them and some time for them to discuss some things, is that they showed their interest and were amazed at how complete the railroad was. And none of them had ever been there. They'd seen it or read about it and knew about it, but nobody had ever really given them a tour. And at the point at which they showed their commitment was kind of the point at which we all realized that, wow, this really might become a real thing.
You figure that these are people who have seen their fair share of preservation movements, have been involved in steam railroading in different capacities. Impressing them at this stage of the game is saying a lot.
I'm very humbled and I'm very appreciative of it. These guys are all just wonderful people, and they love railroading, love the history of it, and really from day one made me feel very comfortable around them. And they're all very well connected, professionally, and have had very successful careers. And really, I can't say enough about any one of them. They've been very, very gracious to us to work with, and now as the board of directors to the EBT Foundation, I'm really excited to work with them and into the future. We're expanding the board out to include some more, broad-based individuals, and Jane Sheffield was another one, Tuna, who's involved with the Allegheny Ridge Corporation, which is a regional development corporation, and she's got connections to a lot of regional development, folks in Harrisburg and around the area, and they just have all been amazing to work with. And I feel very fortunate to be just one piece in this whole thing. I can't really say much more about it other than it's just a really great project to be involved with.
Having a good knowledge base within that team is crucial, especially when you're looking at the railroad and you see all the different types of restoration projects that are going to need to be undertaken in order to bring it back into operation. What are some of the initial items that you're looking at right now?
It's going to be a very busy 2020, I can tell you that. Everything from track to structures to locomotives to cars to marketing, really. I mean, the whole thing needs to be, is basically a startup business. And we have a lot of really great people on board advising us and giving us counsel and volunteers. And Lynn Modinger has been a very strong proponent of the East Broad Top for many, many decades. And it's great to have Lynn's involvement with our locomotive project starting forward. I've made many connections with track related people over the years that are helping us get some really good ideas on how to start and what we need to do, what doesn't need to be done this year, how to spread out the expense, because it's a huge expense to get these things back up. Woodford Brothers from up around Syracuse was the contractor that straightened the blacksmith shop almost 10 years ago. They're involved with the structures and stabilizing the shop facility, and fire suppression systems will be installed. And really, it's very good to have the strong council that we do, and the people just waiting to give us a hand, like Lynn Modinger, and the vast amount of volunteers from the Friends of the East Broad Top, who are very well acquainted with a lot of aspects of the EVT. That there's a lot of great people there as well, very talented people who are, it's going to be great to work with these guys.
Let's talk about that relationship a bit. The Friends of the East Broad Top been around for several decades, and you now have the East Broad Top Foundation, who owns the railroad. What do you envision that relationship continuing to look like as far as how those two entities work with each other in this coming era?
It's not going to be a lot different than what it has been for the last 20 years, really, that they've been doing a lot of the volunteer work at Rock Hill. The Friends have been around, I believe, since around 83 or 86, so it's a very long-standing organization. How I see it working is that, we're the operating entity. We're the ones as a nonprofit who are going to be doing the heavy lifting when it comes to, fundraising and capital projects. And then the Friends, working with them, obviously the volunteers are great, just a great group of people who are willing to put a whole lot into it. Is, what we're hoping is over time that while the Friends have definitely basically kept the roofs on the buildings and things over the last couple of years, it'll be really cool to give those guys an opportunity to work on some more broad-based projects, like, passenger coaches and hopper cars, and, even possibly, some a little bit more limited work on locomotive projects and things. So really just looking to develop that as a partnership for the most part, where they're the public arm of our organization.
Locomotives, possibly the number one question on people's minds. You've got a roundhouse full of 6 steam locomotives, a gas-powered rail car, and a spattering of diesels. What are you looking at as far as initial candidates?
Right now we're just in the initial phases of really making a determination on where to start. Everything in there, it's like the ultimate barn find, situation. Folks that are into restoration of cars, you find a barn full of old cars that every one of them needs work, but every one of them is in probably as good a condition as you could have for 100-year-old locomotives. The 15 was the last one to run in 2011, but it's out of boiler time as of the end of the summer here in August. So really, we're starting from scratch on it, and until we do some basic tests and some inspections, which we've just started to do the preliminary startup of that. Until we get a really good diagnosis of what each one of them looks like inside, in the firebox, in the boiler, the running gear. Because what I can say is, they were run very hard for a lot of years, and every one of them has pluses and minuses to it. So really, I can't say a determination as to which one we're going to start with. The plan is to have 2 of them started in 2020, with the hopes of bringing at least one back in 2021 and another one late in 2021 or early 2022. So, but right now the sky's the limit until we really get a good idea of what condition each one of them is by doing UT testing and some scope work and stuff. That's really where we're at right now.
Looking at other pieces of equipment, passenger cars, what kind of shape are they in? Fortunately, it seems a lot of them have been protected by one of the various facilities on site. How are those looking, and what's the game plan with those?
Like everything else there, it's in amazingly good shape, good condition, because it has been kept inside and preserved over the years. But they're almost in the same situation as the locomotives are in. while the 20 car, the private car, is in immaculate condition interiorly, they all need truck work. They all need some undercarriage work and frames tightened and things. And so really I can't even give you an estimate on that yet, because that's another one of those things that while we're looking at it, getting into it this year to see what we need to do. What I can tell you is nearly all of them are in a condition where they could be, utilized right away. But we want to make sure that everything is secure and safe with them, going forward before we really push hard to use them in regular service. And we're also looking at some options, for potential, purchase of either outside equipment that would match what was there, or even potentially some new construction of, reproduction cars. So that's all really kind of in motion right now.
With all these wonderful pieces of equipment, then comes the track to run them on. How is the line shape-wise from Orbisonia to Colgate Grove, 4.5 miles, which is what was operated during the Kowalczyk era?
Surprisingly, it's not nearly as bad as what you would think. I mean, it needs ties and it needs a brush cut and some ditch work and stuff done. But we're really hoping to be able to make a big push on that this summer in 2020. And who knows? We might have some wheels turning, late summer into the fall. On what level, I don't know, but that's the hope and the plan, and on at least a limited basis. But everything is within reach, so it's just a matter of time and getting the asset or the money, getting it put to work.
Speaking of this summer, this will mark 60 years since Nick Kowalczyk first started the tourist operations back in 1960. Do you have anything planned at this point to celebrate the 60th anniversary of that?
Really what we're calling this kind of a soft start this year in 2020, because of all the work that needs to be done and things. We're looking to have an open house kind of event June 6th, to where we're going to be doing some shop tours and hope to be able to pull out some kind of neat surprises for that. Being that it is the 60th anniversary of the tourist operation, as well as the 60th anniversary of the Orbisonia Rock Hill Furnace Burros, we are already kind of in discussion with them about some events we might hold with them in late July. I believe the traditional date is August 13th, I believe, or 15th, something like that. But due to the changing of their own homecoming festivities, it'll be late in July. And keep tabs on our website, eastbroadtop.com, to keep up with those events. And then we are planning as much of an event as we can possibly muster for Columbus Day weekend for the Friends of the East Broadtop's fall reunion. So a few big things in store, plus shop tours, and just have to keep an eye on our Facebook page and our website, because we're really hoping to be able to pull off some really cool events this year, even without the steam engines running.
I really appreciate, in one of our earlier conversations about this, one of the things you said was it was very important to do this right. That yes, there's the energy and the temptation to get things moving as quickly as possible, and that it could be done, but that it's worth taking the extra time to ensure that what is done will last and hold for several years after this and the next season.
The quick and easy thing that everybody wants to see is let's put a locomotive out there and get it fired up and run trains, and there's nobody that wants to see that more than I do. But it all comes down to what's sustainable, and with a fresh start, basically where we're at and the amount of work we have to do, we've taken the approach, and I say we, meaning as the board of directors and all those involved with the planning of this, is that we want this to be a sustainable venture that will grow and flourish over the years, and not just start out with a big splash and fanfare and then not really get out on a good foot. There's a lot of other organizations over the years that have, really rushed into things and maybe didn't take all the right precautions and the right steps, and ended up being, unfortunate circumstances as a result of it. So, everybody in this group is professional. A lot of these guys have had very successful careers, and it's our plan going forward to do things right and start out with a good locomotive rebuild program that'll be sustainable and will provide us with reliable locomotives for the next decade as we move forward.
So you're listening along and you're thinking, this sounds really cool. How do I become part of this? Brad, how do people become part of this movement?
Really the biggest thing I could say is check out the Friends of the East Broad Top. That's how I got my start in this whole thing, and a lot of other guys as well. And like I said, we're really excited to be working with the Friends because developing the programs and the restoration projects. And if you look at like the Friends of the Cumbres, they've got this special project, I believe it's called a special project team or something to that effect. And they're doing really great things. And everything from rebuilding coaches and cars and passenger trucks and rotary snowplows and the whole 9 yards. So it's that go to febt.org and check it out, because that they're going to be the mechanism to make all of this happen for those who want to volunteer and be a part of it.
Good plan. Last question that I've got for you is, looking at all that you've done so far and ahead at what you're about to embark on, what does this restoration effort mean to you?
For me, like I said earlier on in the interview, is that, from the time I was a kid, this place was always just near and dear to me, and something that I just absolutely was, infatuated with. Just loved it. Just loved the whole idea of it, the look, the feel, the smell when you're there. You smell it. To me, it'll be the biggest return is, and coming from a corporate background like I have, is that the difference with this venture and with the EBT Foundation and the East Broad Top Railroad and the Friends of the East Broad Top is the whole gist of all of these organizations come together is to preserve something for future generations, something that's, the Kowalczyk family has done a great job of, keeping for nearly 60 years, and something that my kids and my grandkids can enjoy and appreciate, and the educational value of, school tours and things of that nature, and things that volunteers can come in and get their hands dirty working on stuff that just should not exist and doesn't exist. That to me, really personally, is my biggest takeaway from this all. I feel, humbled and honored to be a part of that.
You're absolutely right. From my own experience volunteering on work weekends, there is this sense of I am a part of something that is way larger than me or any one single person. And the railroad's always been that way. It's always been larger than any single one person because so many have contributed to its longevity. And it's just very humbling to know, okay, maybe what I did was as simple as putting linseed oil on the walkway on top of a boxcar, but that was a little piece that was mine that I contributed. And there's something very gratifying about that.
It is something that's really cool. And even myself, as a Friends volunteer for as long as I was, I think everybody that's ever set foot there almost feels like they own one little share of stock in the place. And that kind of dedication and interest is just not something that you find really anywhere, which is almost as unique as the railroad itself. And I really hope to be able to provide that, longevity we do as a board and as an organization and spread that well beyond, even the limited basis of fans and stuff that's there now, to make it something that really will benefit Huntington County and Pennsylvania and, rail preservation as a whole. So that's really our big goal and our big takeaway from it.
You've got the right approach, and you've got the right team and the right allies and the right community to support you in that. It's undoubtedly been on a lot of people's minds around the United States about this railroad who know of it and seeing its next stage come. I look forward to, like you, seeing all of this excitement and what this leads to. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Brad. The website is eastbroadtop.com. You could see the launch trailer, there, as well as information about the board members, how you can become involved through Friends of the East Broad Top. Appreciate you coming on the show and introducing all of this to us. It's going to be a fun time.
All right, Nick, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Before we get to the question of the day, I want to touch on why FEBT is so important and why you want to join. And full disclosure, I am a board member of FEBT and have served proudly for 2 years, and I've been an FEBT member for 3 years. So this is not coming from an unbiased party, but I feel like it's important to share my experience with it so that you can see what it means to me and decide if it's something you want to be a part of in some capacity. When I was reintroduced to the railroad 3.5 years ago, I fell in love with it immediately. I say reintroduced because I had the chance to ride on it when I was maybe 8 or 9, but obviously very faint memories. So it was almost a brand new experience. When I had the opportunity to see it, it clicked for me. That got me to join the Friends, and that got me to come back. But it was the quality of the Friends that kept me coming back. This could be the coolest artifact in the world. And if the people that you're working alongside to restore it have giant egos or qualities that you just don't want to hang around them, especially when you're a volunteer, then you're not going to do that. These were guys that from day one, with whatever skills I did or didn't have, were willing to take me in, show me the ropes, and have me help out. That means a lot. And that's why I became a board member, because even before this new era came, even before it was clear what the future of the railroad was going to hold, I knew I wanted to be part of the movement to preserve it. It's hard to convey how special this place is unless you go and see it. And that may sound like a sales pitch, but really, you heard it in the interview. Even these railroad executives who have seen so much in terms of preservation were impressed by what the East Broad Top offers. I would say that the Friends are a group worth joining to experience that treasure with. To give you a sense of what the Friends has, so the Friends actually owns a couple of passenger cars outright, acquired those several years back before this sale. So those are restoration projects. We also have a museum in the station at Robertsdale and the adjoining post office. Those are both owned by Friends of the East Broad Top. Those are still restoration projects that need your support. I encourage you to do one of three things. Number one is donate. Every dollar helps to go and restore this history and preserve it. Number two is join, become a member. It's febt.org, has all the information on that. You could join. We have international members. And number three is volunteer. If you could make it even once to a work weekend in Rock Hill Furnace or Robertsdale and get your hands on this history, you'll see why this place is so special. Again, I recognize I'm biased here, and I don't usually lean this hard for an organization, but this is a case where I have to because I believe in it so deeply. That's why I held off having an East Broad Top episode for so many years, because I wanted to make sure that when I introduced it to you guys, if you weren't familiar with it before, we did it right. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Your question of the day is coming up in a moment. And thank you for listening to my little rant. I hope you decide to join the movement and to join the Friends of the East Broad Top.
And now, the question of the day.
Your question of the day for this episode is, with the East Broad Top Railroad being restored back to operation, what are you most excited about? Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com, links to social media. Also check out febt.org website for the Friends of the East Broad Top. You can see the restoration projects that they've worked on over the years. And again, I highly encourage you to become a member. Thank you guys for listening, and remember as always that the Roundhouse is our house.